Thanks for logging on to myfoxhurricane.com. So we've got a lot to talk about today. Just that big wide view, we now have potential tropical cyclone number 9. That's that area that we've been talking so much about across the Caribbean. Then we also have another area further out into the Atlantic. No concerns with that. So we are not going to focus in on that, even though that is likely to form into something. It looks like it'll work its way on towards the west. And eventually it's going to start to encounter some issues. So it'll stay out over water. We're not going to worry about that at all. But all eyes are looking down across the Caribbean. And this has been a well advertised event that we have been talking about for over a week now. Models have picked up on this very well, and still it's pretty disorganized. You are seeing some pretty big flare-ups of convection. In fact, you are seeing some lightning in here as well. We've got Jamaica up here. Here is Cuba, and then you have the Yucatan Channel right through here. So just to kind of give you an idea of where we are talking with this. But all signs are this is really starting to come together. We're starting to see that low-level spin. The big question is, do we actually have that closed center of circulation? So the Hurricane Hunter plane, they are flying down there right now to find out exactly that and start to get a really good idea of the environment down here. And that's going to start to give us a lot more information that we plug in to these various computer models. Here's another view of this. This is the visible satellite imagery. We can only use this during the daylight hours, but you can start to see some of those lower level clouds kind of spiraling around. That is where the Hurricane Center has actually placed the center right now. So what you're seeing is most of that convection, it's sitting over on that other side, that eastern side of this system, an exposed center, if we actually do have a center with this. So it tells us right now it's not quite at that level to call this a tropical depression, but all the ingredients are there. We've got the warm water, we still have some wind shear, but that is starting to come down, and especially as this works its way up into the Gulf of Mexico, it does look like that wind shear will really start to lessen. So the environment looks like this is really set to help breed not only a tropical storm, but a hurricane, and most likely we could be talking about a major hurricane as this works its way through the Gulf of Mexico. So here is advisory number 1, potential tropical cyclone number 9. Remember, that's that designation they give these systems when it's not quite at that level, but they want to go ahead and start that messaging. They want everybody to be aware of what is potentially coming, because this is going to be affecting land areas. So right now, top winds are at 30 miles an hour, and it's currently moving to the north at about 6 miles an hour. But you look at that forecast track, and even by the time this looks like it's working its way through the Yucatan Channel, we are already talking about a hurricane. The name would most likely be Helene. That system further out into the Atlantic doesn't look like that will give the name in time. So this is going to end up being Hurricane Helene, working its way through the Gulf of Mexico. There you see 100-mile-an-hour winds, 110 miles an hour. I got to tell you, some of the computer models are intensifying this even more. When you look at those high resolution, the regional, the hurricane forecast models, some of these specialized models, it is intensifying this even more. So even the Hurricane Center notes in their discussion that this will quite likely be adjusted and could be adjusted in that upward trend as far as the intensity. And also this track, there will be adjustments to it. We always talk about that. You focus more in on the cone, not that center line. So here we are along the west coast of Florida. We obviously have to watch this very, very closely. And even if it doesn't make landfall on the west coast of Florida, Tampa, across our northern counties, the effects, we will still feel many of the effects. The bands of rain coming through, and then those winds coming up from that south and eventually southwesterly direction, which is also going to cause significant storm surge along the coastline. So as you look at the computer models, you are seeing a fair amount of spread in this. So that uncertainty is in this forecast right now. And a lot of this is because we're just starting to find out exactly where we believe the center of this is. But as the Hurricane Hunter goes down there, they will fine tune exactly where the center of this is, if there actually is a center, and kind of give us an idea of the environment. So it's still going to take some time to really hone in on this forecast. So that's why you're continuing to see that spread. But you can see we do have kind of that tight clustering right up towards the Big Bend of Florida, then working its way up into Georgia. So as you look at the GFS ensemble, what we're looking at is the model just kind of run with different variations in it. And again, you're seeing really a pretty wide range of ideas, but the general idea is it does look like somewhere up through the Big Bend area. But as we look at the wind shear, you notice what's going on across the Gulf of Mexico. Fairly light winds. So we've got light winds, we have warm water, we've got a lot of the ingredients in place to really allow for this system to work its way up into the Gulf of Mexico and flourish with those ideal conditions. It looks like they're going to be pretty close to ideal with this. So then the question becomes, with the dry air, how might that dry air affect the system? There is a lot of dry air sitting to the north of this system, but as this works its way up, it's going to pull a lot of that deep tropical moisture right up into the Gulf of Mexico. You will get some of this drier air kind of hanging out and maybe starting to wrap around the outer parts of this system, but how much of this kind of gets pulled into the middle? That's going to be a big question. And as it does so, how much might that affect this system? So we will continue to kind of fine tune this as well. That is a live location of where the hurricane reconnaissance plane, the Hurricane Hunter, coming out of Biloxi. So they will be down there later on this afternoon. They gather all that information, and then we will start to plug that into our computer models tonight. So it's going to take a little bit more time to get some of this information into the computer models. But what we're looking at here, we've got the European, we've got the GFS in red, and then our own exclusive Fox model in green. That is the starting point where the Hurricane Center has placed this. So now that we have a starting point, we kind of go ahead and we forecast out with this on where we believe this might be going as far as these three models at this point with the information that we know. So remember, things are going to be changing over the next day or so, but we're not going to see drastic changes where something is not going to happen. We're still going to be dealing with the effects. It's just really a question of how much of the effects, and I think they could be fairly significant along the west coast of Florida. Working its way up into the Yucatan, you're still seeing pretty good agreement among the various computer models. Then you start to see a little bit more spread in these models as we head through Thursday, but still they're clustered through Thursday. As we head through the day on Thursday, you're starting to notice the European and the Fox model just a little bit further to the west compared to the GFS model, which pushes it a bit closer to us, maybe just to the north of Cedar Key with this, but that would certainly push it closer to us, intensifying the effects that we feel here on the west coast of Florida. Looking just specifically at our own exclusive Fox model, as we go through the next couple of days, working its way up into the Yucatan, you start to see some of those spiral bands already working their way up into the Gulf of Mexico. Here we are, lunchtime on Wednesday, some of these bands just down to our south and west, and also this is now working its way through some very warm waters, starting to push through an area where we see that lighter wind shear as well. So as we head into Wednesday night, there's that possibility that we will already start to see some of these bands working their way through. As we go through Thursday, the winds are starting to turn more towards that south and eventually southwesterly direction, making landfall up across the Big Bend area. But we are still looking at that very significant south and southwesterly wind. So we've got the heavy rain bands that will work their way through, and then we will have that surge. We will have that push of water along the coastline, causing, I think, some fairly significant coastal flooding as well. And then this system will work its way up into Georgia and cause significant issues across Georgia as well, because this looks like it's going to be a fairly large system. So it's going to take some time to spin down, and it's going to cause all kinds of problems, I think, all the way up into northern Georgia, Atlanta, up into the mountains. They are going to see a lot of this rain as well. Looking at that wind field as we go through the next couple of days, you're starting to see it really intensify as it works its way into the Gulf of Mexico. There you're seeing winds up over 75 miles an hour. In fact, as we head into Thursday, there you see that pink shade where we are looking at 100 plus mile an hour winds. Those winds along our coastline, notice where we're at here, right around that 60 to 70 mile range with those winds right along the coastline, all coming from that south and southwesterly direction. That causes a lot of coastal erosion, a lot of flooding along our coastline as well. And then as you look at just that dry air, you are seeing a little bit of this wrapping around. I don't think, at least at this point, we're not seeing any signs of significant amounts of dry air causing big issues for this. So all the ingredients are really in place that this will be a pretty quickly intensifying storm and potentially a Category 3 or at least a major hurricane working its way up into the Gulf of Mexico. So we at least have to plan for that idea. Where you're seeing that yellow shade on the map, that's where you really want to be preparing for the potential of storm impacts. And then we wait to see what kind of evacuations may be put in place as we go through the coming days. So we will keep you updated right here on myfoxhurricane.com.